You pulled into a gas station yesterday and it was $3.29 a gallon. You pulled into the same gas station today and it's $3.49. Nothing happened. There was no war, no hurricane, no explosion at a refinery. The sun rose, you went to work, you came home, and somehow gasoline costs 20 cents more per gallon than it did this morning. Nobody explained it. Nobody warned you. The sign just changed, and across the street, another gas station is selling the same fuel for $3.39, same gas, same octane, same zip code, 10 cents cheaper, 200 feet away. Why? What's different? Why is one station charging more than the station you can literally see from the pump? Gas prices feel random. They feel personal. They feel like someone, somewhere, is just making up numbers. And honestly, you're not entirely wrong. But it's not random. It's a chain, a long, complicated global chain, and every single link in that chain takes its cut before the gasoline reaches your tank. The price you pay at the pump is the final result of crude oil markets, international politics, refinery capacity, transportation logistics, state taxes, federal taxes, local competition, brand licensing fees, and the individual business decisions of the gas station owner. It's not one thing. It's about 15 things stacked on top of each other. And once you understand the stack, gas prices will never confuse you again. Let's walk through the whole thing. Gasoline begins as crude oil. That's the raw material. It comes out of the ground as a thick, dark, unrefined liquid that's essentially useless in its natural state. You can't put crude oil in your car. You can't burn it in your furnace. It has to be processed, refined, before it becomes any of the useful products we associate with it: gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, heating oil, plastics, asphalt, and hundreds of other petrochemical products. Crude oil is extracted from underground reservoirs through drilling. These reservoirs exist because millions of years ago, organic material, dead plants, algae, marine organisms, accumulated on the floors of ancient oceans and lakes, got buried under layers of sediment, and was subjected to intense heat and pressure over geological timescales. That heat and pressure slowly converted the organic material into hydrocarbons, long chains of carbon and hydrogen atoms that store enormous amounts of chemical energy. That's what crude oil is: ancient solar energy stored in chemical bonds, trapped underground in rock formations. The biggest crude oil producers in the world include the United States, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Canada, Iraq, China, the UAE, Brazil, Iran, and Kuwait. The US is actually the world's largest crude oil producer, which surprises a lot of people. But producing oil and controlling its price are two very different things, and that distinction matters enormously for what you pay at the pump. You can't talk about gas prices without talking about OPEC. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries is a group of major oil-producing nations that coordinate their production levels to influence global oil prices. The core members include Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, Iran, and several others. The expanded group, OPEC Plus, includes Russia and other non-member allies who cooperate on production targets. OPEC functions, essentially, as a cartel. A cartel is a group of producers who agree to limit their output in order to keep prices higher than they would be in a truly free market. If every oil-producing country pumped as much oil as they possibly could, the market would be flooded with supply, and prices would drop. OPEC prevents that by setting production quotas. Each member agrees to produce only a certain number of barrels per day. When OPEC wants prices to go up, they cut production. Less oil on the market means more competition among buyers, which drives prices higher. When they want to stabilize prices or prevent them from crashing, they adjust quotas accordingly. And when individual members cheat on their quotas, which happens regularly, it creates internal tension and market uncertainty. The important thing to understand is that crude oil is priced on a global market. The two main pricing benchmarks are WTI, West Texas Intermediate, which is the U.S. benchmark, and Brent crude, which is the international benchmark primarily based on North Sea production. These prices are set by commodity trading on exchanges like the New York Mercantile Exchange and the Intercontinental Exchange. Traders, some of whom are buying oil to actually use, and many of whom are speculators betting on price movements, buy and sell futures contracts. And those trades establish the price of oil you see quoted on the news. When the news says oil is at $75 a barrel, that's the price of a futures contract for a barrel of crude oil on one of these exchanges. And that price is the starting point, the foundation of what you'll eventually pay at the pump. When crude oil prices rise, gasoline prices follow. When crude drops, gas prices follow, usually. More on that later. Let's look at what you're actually paying for when you buy a gallon of gas. The exact breakdown shifts constantly based on market conditions, but the general structure looks like this. The single biggest component is the cost of crude oil itself. Historically, crude oil accounts for roughly 50 to 60% of the retail price of a gallon of gasoline. When crude oil is expensive, the share is higher. When crude is cheap, the other components become a bigger proportion. But in most market conditions, the raw material, the oil that comes out of the ground, is the majority of your cost. The second biggest component is refining. Crude oil has to be processed into gasoline, and that processing costs money. Refining typically accounts for roughly 15 to 20% of the retail price, though this fluctuates significantly based on refinery capacity, maintenance schedules, and seasonal demand shifts. Taxes are the third major component. Federal excise tax on gasoline in the U.S. is 18.4 cents per gallon and hasn't changed since 1993. State taxes vary enormously, from around 10 cents per gallon in some states to over 60 cents in others. Some states also add local or county taxes on top. When you combine federal, state, and local taxes, the total tax burden per gallon ranges from roughly 30 cents to over 80 cents depending on where you live. If you've ever wondered why gas costs dramatically different amounts in different states, taxes are a massive part of the answer. The final slice is distribution, marketing, and retail margin. This covers everything from transporting the refined gasoline from the refinery to the terminal, trucking it from the terminal to the gas station's operating costs, the brand licensing fee if it's a branded station, and the station owner's profit margin. This component is typically 10 to 15% of the retail price, and the actual profit margin for the gas station owner is shockingly thin, often just a few cents per gallon. Think of a gallon of gas like a pizza. The crude oil is the dough, sauce, and cheese, the main ingredients, the bulk of the cost. Refining is the labor, the work of turning raw ingredients into something usable. Taxes are the delivery fee. You're paying it no matter what. It's non-negotiable, and it varies wildly by location. And the gas station's margin is the tip, the smallest piece, and the one the person doing the final work actually keeps. Crude oil is a complex mixture of thousands of different hydrocarbon molecules. Some are light and volatile. Some are heavy and thick. The refining process separates these molecules by weight and boiling point through a process called fractional distillation. The crude oil is heated in a furnace until most of it vaporizes, then fed into a distillation column, a tall tower with trays at different heights. As the vapor rises through the column, it cools. Lighter molecules with lower boiling points rise higher before condensing. Heavier molecules condense at lower levels. At the top of the column, you collect the lightest products, gases like propane and butane. In the middle, you get gasoline, kerosene, and jet fuel. Toward the bottom, you get diesel fuel and heating oil. At the very bottom, the heaviest stuff. Heavy fuel oil, asphalt, and petroleum coke collects. Gasoline comes from the middle of the column, but the raw distillate isn't ready for your car yet. It goes through additional processing, catalytic cracking, reforming, alkylation, blending to adjust the octane rating, remove sulfur, and meet the specific formulation requirements for the market it's being sold in. And here's where it gets complicated. Not all gasoline is the same. Different states and even different cities have different fuel formulation requirements. California has the strictest fuel standards in the country. Their specially blended gasoline, called carb gasoline, is more expensive to produce and can only be made by refineries configured for it. That's one reason California gas prices are consistently higher than the national average, beyond their higher taxes. The fuel is literally a different product. Summer gasoline is also different from winter gasoline. In summer, fuel must have a lower vapor pressure to reduce evaporative emissions in hot weather. Summer blend gasoline costs more to produce. The switchover from winter to summer blends happens in spring, and it often contributes to the price increase you see at the pump every year around April and May. You're not imagining it. Gas does get more expensive in spring, partly because the fuel itself is more expensive to make. Refinery capacity is another critical factor. The U.S. has roughly 130 operating refineries, and collectively they run at high utilization rates, often above 90% of capacity. That sounds efficient, but it also means there's very little slack in the system. When a refinery goes offline for maintenance, which happens on a scheduled basis, or is forced offline by an unplanned event like a fire, equipment failure, or a hurricane, the supply of refined gasoline drops while demand stays the same. Prices spike, sometimes dramatically. A single major refinery outage can add 20 to 50 cents per gallon in the affected region within days. This is why hurricanes affect gas prices even if they don't hit your state. A significant portion of U.S. refining capacity is concentrated along the Gulf Coast, Texas and Louisiana especially. A hurricane threatening that region threatens the refineries, which threatens gasoline supply for the entire country. The price response is often immediate because commodity traders anticipate the disruption before it even happens. Once the gasoline is refined, it needs to get to you. And the logistics of moving millions of gallons of fuel across the country every day are more complex than most people realize. Refined gasoline leaves the refinery and goes to a pipeline terminal or distribution hub. From there, it's transported via pipeline, barge, rail, or truck to regional terminals and storage facilities. Pipelines handle the bulk of long-distance fuel transportation in the U.S. The Colonial Pipeline, for example, runs from Houston to the New York Harbor area and carries roughly 2.5 million barrels of fuel per day: gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and heating oil. When the Colonial Pipeline was shut down by a cyber attack in 2021, fuel shortages and price spikes hit the entire East Coast within days. One pipeline, half the East Coast's fuel supply, shut down by hackers. Prices at the pump jumped immediately. At the regional terminal, gasoline is blended with ethanol. Most U.S. gasoline is E-syn, meaning 10% ethanol by volume, and any proprietary additives that distinguish one brand from another. Here's a detail that surprises a lot of people. The base gasoline at a terminal is often the same product regardless of brand. Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, they're all drawing from the same terminal supply. The difference is the additive package that gets blended in at the terminal rack. Each brand has its own detergent and additive formula that gets injected as the tanker truck is filled. So the Shell gasoline and the Chevron gasoline start as the same base fuel. The brand-specific additives are what differ, and those additives represent a tiny fraction of the total volume. From the terminal, tanker trucks carry the fuel to individual gas stations. Each truck holds roughly 8,000 to 10,000 gallons. The cost of trucking, the distance from the terminal to the station, and local delivery logistics all factor into the final price. A gas station close to a terminal has lower delivery costs than one in a remote area. That difference shows up at the pump. Now we can answer the question from the beginning. Same fuel, same neighborhood, different prices. Why? Gas stations set their own prices. They're independent businesses. Even if they carry a brand name, most are owned by individual franchisees or operators, not by the oil company itself. The station owner buys fuel from the terminal at the rack price, the wholesale price at the terminal, plus delivery costs and taxes. Their retail price is the rack price plus their markup, and that markup varies based on a bunch of factors. Rent and property costs. A station on a busy corner with high visibility signage pays more in rent and passes that cost to you. Labor costs. The number of pumps. Whether the station has a convenience store attached, and this one matters a lot because many gas station owners actually lose money or break even on fuel sales and make their real profit on the convenience store. The gas is a loss leader that gets you onto the property, so you buy a $3 energy drink and a $2 bag of chips at a massive margin. That's the real business. The gas is the bait. Competition matters enormously. If 4 gas stations sit at the same intersection, they're all watching each other's signs and adjusting prices aggressively to stay competitive. If one station is the only option for 5 miles, they have less pressure to keep prices low. Location, competition density, and the operator's business strategy all influence the price on the sign. Brand matters too, but maybe not the way you'd think. Branded stations, Shell, Chevron, BP, pay a licensing fee to use the brand name and are often contractually required to buy fuel from specific terminals or suppliers, which can limit their ability to shop for the cheapest wholesale price. Unbranded or independent stations have more flexibility to buy from whoever offers the best rack price on any given day. That flexibility often translates to lower retail prices. And then there's the timing factor. Gas stations don't all change their prices at the same time. When wholesale costs drop, some stations lower their prices immediately to attract volume. Others wait, keeping prices higher for a day or two to pocket the extra margin before competition forces them down. When wholesale costs rise, some stations raise prices immediately to protect their margin. Others absorb the increase for a day, hoping to attract customers, before eventually raising their price too. This lag, the difference in how quickly each station responds to wholesale price changes, is why two stations a block apart can have different prices at any given moment. You've noticed this. Everyone has noticed this. When oil prices spike, gas prices at the pump rise within days. When oil prices drop, gas prices take weeks to come down. It's infuriating, and it has a name, the rockets and feathers phenomenon. There are several explanations. The cynical one, which has some truth to it, is that stations and refiners are slow to lower prices because higher prices mean higher margins, and they'll ride that margin as long as competition allows. The more structural explanation is about how fuel moves through the supply chain. The gasoline in a station's underground tanks was purchased at a previous wholesale price. When crude oil drops, it takes time for that cheaper oil to be refined into gasoline, transported to terminals, and delivered to stations. The fuel in the tanks right now was bought at the old, higher price. The station owner argues, legitimately, that they'd lose money selling it below what they paid, but that logic should also apply in reverse. When prices are rising, the fuel in the tanks was bought at the old, lower price, so the station is making extra margin by raising the retail price before their costs have actually gone up. In practice, prices tend to rise quickly when costs go up. Stations protect margins immediately and fall slowly when costs go down. Stations take their time passing savings along. The asymmetry is real. It's been documented in economic studies, and it's one of the most consistent patterns in retail fuel pricing. We mentioned taxes earlier, but they deserve their own section because the variation is enormous, and it directly explains why gas costs significantly more in some states than others. Federal excise tax is 18.4 cents per gallon on gasoline and 24.4 cents per gallon on diesel. These rates have been frozen since 1993. Not indexed to inflation, not adjusted for road maintenance costs, just frozen at the same level for over 30 years while the cost of everything else, construction, materials, labor, has increased dramatically. The Highway Trust Fund, which these taxes support, has been running shortfalls for years because the revenue hasn't kept pace with infrastructure needs. State taxes are where the real variation lives. Some states keep fuel taxes low as a matter of policy. Others use fuel taxes to fund road construction, public transit, and environmental programs. The highest combined state and local fuel tax rates can exceed 60 cents per gallon in states like California, Illinois, and Pennsylvania. The lowest rates are found in states like Alaska, Mississippi, and Oklahoma. California deserves special mention because it stacks multiple layers: a high state excise tax, a sales tax on fuel, a cap-and-trade carbon surcharge, a low carbon fuel standard fee, and an underground storage tank fee. Add it all up, and Californians pay substantially more per gallon in taxes and regulatory costs than almost anywhere else in the country. When you see California gas at $5.50 and Texas gas at $2.80, a huge chunk of that difference is taxes and formulation requirements, not the actual cost of the fuel itself. Some states have occasionally paused or reduced their gas taxes temporarily during periods of high prices to provide consumer relief. These gas tax holidays are politically popular but economically debated. Critics argue that suspending the gas tax doesn't always result in lower prices at the pump because station operators and wholesalers may absorb the savings into their margins instead of passing it to consumers. Here's the part of gas pricing that feels the most unfair. A significant portion of short-term oil price movement has nothing to do with actual supply and demand. It's driven by speculation and market psychology. Commodity futures markets allow traders to buy and sell contracts for future delivery of oil. Many of these traders never intend to take physical delivery of a single barrel. They're financial speculators, hedge funds, banks, trading firms making bets on which direction the price will move. When news breaks that might affect oil supply, a conflict in the Middle East, sanctions on a producing country, a hurricane heading for the Gulf Coast, an OPEC announcement, traders react instantly. They buy contracts if they think prices will rise, driving the price up. They sell if they think prices will fall, driving the price down. This speculative activity can amplify price swings beyond what the underlying supply and demand fundamentals would justify. A geopolitical conflict that threatens but doesn't actually disrupt oil production can still cause oil prices to spike because traders are pricing in the risk. The threat alone moves the market, and because gasoline prices are tethered to crude oil prices, those speculative swings flow straight through to what you pay at the pump. It means that a tweet, a news headline, a diplomatic incident, or a weather forecast can change the price of gas at your local station within days, even if not a single barrel of oil was actually lost from the global supply. The market is pricing in possibilities, not just realities. And you're paying for those possibilities every time you fill up. Why gas costs different amounts in different countries. Quick global context. Americans complain about gas prices, but compared to most developed nations, American gasoline is remarkably cheap. In many European countries, gas prices are 2 to 3 times what Americans pay. The difference is almost entirely taxes. European countries use fuel taxes to fund public infrastructure, discourage car dependency, incentivize fuel-efficient vehicles, and meet climate targets. The tax component in countries like the UK, Germany, France, and the Netherlands can represent 50 to 60% or more of the retail price. The crude oil costs the same. The refining costs are similar. It's the tax structure that creates the dramatic price difference. On the other end, some oil-producing countries heavily subsidize fuel for their domestic population. Gasoline in countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Venezuela has historically been extremely cheap, sometimes less than $1 per gallon, because the government absorbs the cost difference. These subsidies are politically popular but economically expensive, and several countries have been gradually reducing them. The U.S. sits in the middle. Higher taxes than oil states, much lower taxes than Europe, with prices that mostly reflect market forces plus a moderate tax burden. Almost every gallon of gasoline you buy in the United States contains 10% ethanol by volume. That's not optional. It's mandated by the Renewable Fuel Standard, a federal policy that requires a certain volume of renewable fuels, primarily ethanol made from corn, to be blended into the national fuel supply each year. The rationale is partly environmental. Ethanol reduces certain tailpipe emissions, and partly agricultural. Ethanol production creates demand for corn, which supports the farming industry. The U.S. is the world's largest ethanol producer, and the corn ethanol industry is a significant economic force in Midwestern states. The policy has strong political support in farming states and faces criticism from both environmental groups who question ethanol's net carbon benefit and automotive groups who note that ethanol contains less energy per gallon than gasoline, which reduces fuel economy. How does ethanol affect your gas price? It's complicated. Ethanol is generally cheaper to produce per gallon than gasoline, so blending it in can reduce the overall cost of the finished product. But ethanol has about 30% less energy content than gasoline, which means your car burns more fuel per mile on E-cen than it would on pure gasoline. You're getting slightly fewer miles per gallon, which means you're filling up slightly more often, which partially offsets any cost savings from the cheaper blend. There's also the infrastructure factor. Ethanol is corrosive to certain materials and can't be transported through the same pipelines as gasoline without risk of contamination and corrosion. It's typically blended at the terminal, not at the refinery, which adds logistical complexity. And because ethanol absorbs water, it has a shorter shelf life than pure gasoline, which creates storage and timing considerations in the supply chain. The ethanol mandate is one of those policies that most people don't know exists, even though it directly affects every gallon they buy. It's baked into the system, a hidden variable in the pizza analogy that changes the recipe slightly but consistently. Here's a question almost nobody is asking yet, but probably should be. What happens to gas prices as electric vehicles take market share? The logic seems straightforward. Fewer gas-powered cars means less demand for gasoline, which should push prices down. And in the very long term, that's probably true. But the transition period could be unpredictable and potentially painful for people still driving gas cars. Here's why. The gasoline supply chain has enormous fixed costs. Refineries cost billions to build and maintain. Pipelines require constant investment. Terminals, storage facilities, and distribution networks all have overhead that exists regardless of how much fuel moves through them. As demand for gasoline gradually decreases, those fixed costs get spread across fewer gallons. The per-gallon cost of refining, transporting, and distributing gasoline could actually increase even as demand falls, because the infrastructure is being underutilized. There's also the investment question. If refiners believe gasoline demand is in long-term decline, they're less likely to invest in new refining capacity, upgrades, or maintenance. Reduced investment means existing refineries age without replacement, capacity tightens, and supply becomes less resilient to disruptions. A refinery outage in a world with declining demand but also declining capacity could cause the same price spikes we see today, or worse. Gas stations face a similar problem. If fuel sales decline, some stations close. Fewer stations mean less competition. Less competition means less downward pressure on prices. In rural areas where stations are already sparse, this could hit hardest. The last gas station standing in a region doesn't have much incentive to keep prices low. The transition from gas to electric won't kill gas prices overnight, but it might create a weird middle period where the people still buying gas, disproportionately those who can't afford new EVs, face higher prices because the system supporting gasoline is shrinking, while still having to cover its costs. It's an equity problem disguised as an energy transition, and it's worth thinking about. If you've been paying attention for a few years, you've probably noticed that gas prices follow a loose seasonal pattern. They tend to rise in spring, peak in summer, and fall in autumn and winter. This isn't coincidence. It's the result of several seasonal factors stacking on top of each other. In spring, refineries switch from winter blend to summer blend gasoline. Summer blend is more expensive to produce because it has a lower Reid vapor pressure, meaning it evaporates less easily in hot weather, which reduces smog-forming emissions. The switchover process takes time, sometimes requires partial refinery shutdowns for reconfiguration, and temporarily reduces gasoline output. Less supply plus the same demand means higher prices. Summer also brings peak driving season. People take road trips, families drive to vacation destinations. Overall gasoline consumption increases. Higher demand on top of the already constrained summer blend supply pushes prices further up. This is why the most expensive gas you'll buy all year is usually sometime between Memorial Day and Labor Day. In autumn, the switch back to winter blend gasoline happens. Winter blend is cheaper to produce. Driving demand decreases as summer ends. Refineries that were doing maintenance in spring are back at full capacity. All of these factors combine to push prices back down through the fall and into winter. This annual cycle repeats every year with remarkable consistency. The amplitude varies. Some years the summer spike is dramatic, some years it's mild, but the pattern itself is one of the most predictable things about gas pricing. If you have any flexibility in when you fill up or how much you drive, knowing this cycle can save you real money over the course of a year. Gas prices start with crude oil, which accounts for over half the cost. Crude is priced on global commodity exchanges, influenced by OPEC production decisions, geopolitical events, and financial speculation. The oil gets refined into gasoline, which costs money and varies by region and season. Federal, state, and local taxes add 30 to 80 plus cents per gallon depending on where you live. The finished fuel travels by pipeline, barge, and truck to terminals where brand-specific additives are blended in. Gas stations are independent businesses that set their own retail prices based on wholesale cost, competition, location, and business strategy. Prices rise fast and fall slow because of margin protection and supply chain timing. Speculators can move oil prices based on threats and possibilities, not just actual supply disruptions. The station across the street is cheaper because of different rent, competition, brand contracts, and timing. Gas prices aren't random. They're the end result of a global supply chain with about 15 different hands, reaching in and taking their cut between the oil well and your fuel tank. Crude oil markets set the base. OPEC decides how much oil flows. Refineries turn it into something usable and charge for the complexity. Governments stack taxes on top. Pipeline operators, trucking companies, terminal operators, and brand licensors all take their piece. And the gas station owner, the person whose sign you complain about, is often making a few cents per gallon and hoping you buy a coffee inside. You can't control crude oil prices. You can't negotiate with OPEC. You can't change your state's tax rate. But you can understand why the number on the sign is what it is. And the next time gas jumps 20 cents overnight and your coworker says the oil companies are screwing us, you can explain, calmly, with the confidence of someone who actually knows the supply chain, exactly which of the 15 links in the chain got more expensive and why. If this video made gas prices make sense for the first time, hit like, drop your state and what you're currently paying in the comments. I want to see the tax difference in real time, and subscribe so you stop blaming the gas station owner for something that started in a Saudi Arabian boardroom 6 weeks ago. Later.